Heidi Ochiai is a martial arts instructor. Now he's in his 80s, but in New York State, where he lived for many years, he had a rather unusual way of demonstrating concentration as he taught. He would have a volunteer lie on his back and take an apple and balance it on his throat. Then Heidi would put on a blindfold and hold a razor sharp sword over the volunteer. It would come flashing down toward his throat at a speed of roughly 50 miles an hour, and then go back up just as quickly. In order to slice the apple and not the throat, the sword must cut to but never through the skin, through the bottom of the apple, but no farther. Wow. And here's what Mr. Ochiai would say. He would say, my students trust me. My students trust me. He said, and there's always an abundance of volunteers. They must have trusted him. For practice, he would place a grain of cooked rice. Good thing he cooked it first. A grain of cooked rice on someone's forehead and slice just far enough to slice through the grain of rice, actually not completely through it, almost, but just enough so that it would still cling to the blade when he brought it back. Don't ask me to volunteer. I mean, despite his unparalleled ability, he would never have been so well known had it not been for those trusting volunteers. Those trusting volunteers. Hey, what a magnificent God we have, right? So powerful, so talented. What strength he has, and what control he has over his strength, our God. But people will never learn. People will never learn what he can do in their lives without trust. They will never volunteer for his activity in their lives if there's no faith. Faith. Trust. Hard to come by these days, you know. I mean, there's so much deception out there. Who can you trust? Can you trust teachers? Can you trust your doctor? Can you trust your pharmacist? Can you trust your attorney? Can you trust a government official? A news reporter? Can you trust a church and its leadership? Can you trust your mate? Your kids? And if you happen to still have them, your parents? Hard to come by. And yet, we can't live without trust. I mean, whether you're a Christian or not, it's an absolute essential in order to have a fulfilled life. There is a need in all of us to have some trust. The advertisers picked up on that a long time ago, didn't they? Trust us to treat you right. Or how about this? I'll bet somebody out there can finish this. You can trust your car to the... See? You can trust your car to the man who wears the star. Well, can you? I just gave $1,500 worth of trust to an outfit to get my car back. Everyday life is filled with faith incidents. I mean, without trust, you'd never write a check. Some of us still do that in our fast-paced society. You know, without some trust, you'd never do online banking. You'd never use a credit card. Shoot, you couldn't even walk across the street if you didn't have trust either in that green light and those red lights or in the walk signal. You have to trust or you never move. You can't live without trust. You'd never sit down in a chair without trust. You would never again eat any purchased food without trust. Now we come to Christianity. We celebrate as fellow Christians, and the Christian walk is full of faith incidents. That's why the passage we're going to look at, Hebrews 11, and we're going to be there for a few weeks. That passage is full of information about faith. And it makes this comment early on. Without faith, it is impossible to please him. Can't even get started with God without faith. In fact, here's what I want you to see as we spend time here in Hebrews 11. I want you to see that people of faith are pleasers of God. Now, most of us do accept the challenge of being a God pleaser. You want his pleasure. You want his commendation. And so it says in the very first verse of this chapter that we're going to look at, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Oh, how we wish we had the faith of just that first verse. And there are many verses in this chapter. How we wish we had what that verse says, confidence, sure about my future. Because if I'm confident about my future, I have hope. And what about what that verse said about the present? Assurance or conviction about what I can't see that's all around me right now, the present. Confidence, faith that there really is a God, that there really is an unseen world that exists, a spiritual world. You know, more often we don't feel like verse 1, chapter 11, verse 1. We feel more like the last verse of chapter 10, which uses this phrase, those who shrink back and are destroyed. Yeah, we all kind of feel like that at times, don't we? Shrink back. In fact, we see the words of Jesus where he says, have faith and you can move what? Mountains. And so we find ourselves doubting and asking the question, will I ever move a mountain? Will I ever move a mountain like Jesus describes? Of course, he's talking about figurative. He's not talking about the physical mountain. He's talking about the mountains of life. So let's do some examining, okay? Let's examine our faith here against the backdrop of this 11th chapter of Hebrews. And here's what I think we're going to learn. Every man's faith, every woman's faith, every Christian's faith, maybe that's the best way to put it, should have 3 foundational blocks. 3 foundational blocks, and they really are kind of like steps because they progress. You have to start with number 1 before you get to number 2 and then to number 3. So, as we're looking, just don't forget. Well, let me read the second verse. Don't forget this. This is what the ancients were commended for. There it is. Pleasing God. What kind of faith is it that pleases God? I think it has to have these 3 foundational blocks. People of faith are pleasers of God. And the first foundation block, the first step is this. Faith begins with the person of God. And actually, that's all the further we're going to get today. You say, well, if that's all the further we're going to get, let's just stand and sing the song then. You said that's all the further. No, let me elaborate. That's what preachers do, right? Faith begins with the person of God. It doesn't begin with a doctrine. Faith doesn't begin with a teaching. Faith doesn't begin with the collection of a bunch of rules. I can even say this. Faith doesn't begin with a church. It begins with a person. With the person of God. And most important, or at least where you're going to have to stop first, and we already have seen this, but we're going to see it again, you have to believe in God's existence. You have to believe in God's existence. I want you to notice the first part of verse 6. Verse 6 here in chapter 11. And without faith, it is impossible to please God. There's that thing about being a God pleaser. Because anyone who comes to him must believe what? That he exists. Let's stop right there. We'll look at the rest of that verse in a moment. But must believe in God's existence. So if we're going to believe in the person of God, it means we have to believe there's a person there. I mean, how does God respond to one who denies that he even exists, but then in a time of trauma starts looking for him, starts talking to him? Well, the fact is God is pretty big-hearted, and he can handle that. But I don't think Mahatma Gandhi was quite that good-hearted, even though he was a good-hearted guy. He was once approached by an atheist who wanted to promote an anti-God society. Here's what Gandhi said in reply to him. It amazes me to find an intelligent person who fights against something which he does not at all believe exists. You want to be a God pleaser? You want to have faith that pleases God? Well, obviously it starts with believing that he exists. But let's assume that, okay? Because of whom I'm speaking to today. So let's get more specific. What are some specific attributes of God that are mentioned here in this chapter that are important to direct our faith toward, to believe about this person of God? Here, how about this one? He's invisible. And you thought this was going to be hard. I mean, aren't you all saying, well, yeah. Well, he is invisible. Look at the 27th verse with me, all right? Down to verse 27. Speaking about Moses here, by faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered, in other words, he kept faith, because he saw him who is invisible. Actually, Moses never saw any more than just the backside of God. If you know the story and where Moses said he wanted to see God's glory and all of that. John is right when in his gospel, the first chapter, John says, no one has ever seen God. That is, God as he is in his power and his glory. And so here on earth, largely, we would have to say he's invisible. We may see his effects. We do see his effects. But he himself is not to be seen with the naked eye. Now, let's get something straight here. I did not say, I turn to my right and it makes that sound, huh? Okay, well, let's put up with that for today so that I can move around a little bit. But I'll walk around up here tomorrow and see if it does that, okay? Yeah. But here's what I want you to see. Just because we say God is invisible does not mean we are saying that he's imaginary. No, not at all. Big Bird, he's an important resource here. Big Bird said, invisible means something is there but you can't see it, like Snuffleupagus. Yeah. What a great idea they had there. An imaginary friend that was huge, but you couldn't see him. God is spirit. That's what John also tells us. Actually, he's quoting Jesus in John 4. God is spirit. And let's take a moment here to talk about something that we've talked about before. When you find that word spirit, most often, like for instance in John 4, it says God is pneuma. That's the original in Greek. And we get a word from that, a word or two from that. We get pneumatics. What are pneumatics? Well, I think of tools that operate on air pressure. Air. Pneuma. You get sick in your lungs, and what's it called? Pneumonia. P-N-E-U. The word used oftentimes, like in John 4, did it again, like in John 4, for spirit. The word for spirit. Also for wind. Can't see it. Also for breath. Well, I just don't believe in breath. I can't see it. Just have someone hold their mouth tight over a hand over your mouth and plug your nose, and you begin to believe in what you can't actually see. Perhaps the best description of God's invisibility is wind. What did Jesus say to Nicodemus when he was trying to describe to him the moving of God about? He's like the wind, he says. You see where it comes, you know it comes from somewhere, you know it's going somewhere, you see its effects, but you can't literally see the pneuma. How about this passage? Listen to this out of way back, Book of Job. You know, the Book of Job, if you place it chronologically, it's probably somewhere like in the time of Genesis, which is a large period of time, but it's way back. Here's what Job says. If it were his, and that's God, if it were God's intention, and he withdrew his spirit and breath, see how they go together? Spirit and breath, all humanity would perish together and mankind would return to the dust. If God pulled out completely of our entire universe, you know, we talk about how wicked and godless our universe is, but he hasn't pulled his presence yet. His spirit is still here. If God pulls out, we go back to dust. He holds it together. He maintains this marvelous creation of his. What a fantastic concept or idea we have here of this God who is invisible. Well, what else is he? How about this? Look at the third verse. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. Let me say that in other words, okay? What is seen, speaking of creation, is made out of what is... Go ahead and switch me over to here. Let's see if that stops that. Yeah. So that what is seen is made out of what is not seen. That's what it's saying here in these verses. So that what is seen is made out of what is not seen. What are we talking about here? Creativity. Our God is not only invisible, our God is creative. He is the only creator that I know of that can pull off what we just read. Create something out of what? Nothing. That's our God. So creative. You've heard it before. Man rearranges, only God creates. I personally believe that it would take a lot more faith for me, I know it would, to believe and accept the Big Bang Theory. These events that somehow happened in an order at a time long ago that brought into existence the universe. No, I need a creator in there. I need a force, an intelligent force. And I know that these are tough questions when we consider the question, for instance, well, how can something be made out of nothing? Well, the only answer to that is you're going to have to accept that by faith. And I find it takes less faith to believe there was a creator. They could create something out of nothing. You know, there are a lot of tough questions out there. I found some. I admit these are tongue-in-cheek. These are tongue-in-cheek tough questions that I found on the internet. So, what's the speed of dark? How about this one? How come abbreviated is such a long word? Tough questions. If you're sending someone, mailing someone styrofoam, what do you wrap it in? Maybe my favorite. What do little birdies see when they get knocked unconscious? Hey, there's some tough questions. A lot tougher than that. We just looked at one. How can something be made out of nothing? How can something so beautiful as the world, or let's even just say the crowning touch of God's creativity, how can a human being be made out of nothing? God kind of gave us a hint of that, didn't he, when he said he created us out of the dust of the ground. Amazing, our God's creativity. And that's part of our faith. Augustine used to say, when we, in talking about this issue of God and who made God, in fact, before I quote Augustine, I should look at a verse here out of the Psalms, and this happens to be a psalm written by not David, but Moses, the 90th psalm, and it reads this: "Before the mountains were born, you brought forth the whole world. From everlasting to everlasting," and to me that's kind of like an arrow going both ways, "you are God. So, if you want to talk about tough questions, who made God? Augustine said, he was in himself. Our God, we believe, is the first, the Alpha, the first cause. There's this little poem years ago. Back of the loaf is the snowy flour, and back of the flour, the mill, and back of the mill are the wheat and the shower and the sun and the Father's will. Eventually, it gets back to the first cause. And this God of ours, his creativity is constantly seen. He loves to make things. Charles Lindbergh's wife, Anne, once said this: it's nice to think how one can be recklessly lost in a daisy in God's creativity. So, these are attributes that are just astounding that we are told about here in Scripture, even just here in Hebrews 11. He's invisible, he's creative. How about this one? He's resolute. Now, I actually changed what I originally had wanted that point to say. I originally wanted to say, he's opinionated. But it's such a negative word in our vocabulary, opinionated. You rarely are speaking of someone that you really think is a marvelous individual if you say, they're so opinionated. So I changed it to God is resolute. God is decided. God is settled. But the fact is, he's got opinions. His opinion, well, let's look at this fourth verse here, because you see it. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous. God had an opinion about Abel when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he's dead. Look at verse 5. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found, because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. God said, I like that guy. That's an opinion. God was resolute and still is. God is not neutral. The fact is, you won't find one that's more opinionated than God. But here's why God can be so opinionated, and it's not negative. He's always right. His judgments are fair. His wisdom is far beyond ours. He's always right. So, sometimes he is displeased. He has that opinion. Numbers 11:1 says he was displeased with complainers, and his anger was aroused. When you read that story in 2 Samuel about David, it says regarding David's adultery and his murder of the husband, it says God was displeased with David. God is displeased with injustice. Especially if it's pushed upon children. If there is mistreatment of children, the scripture is very clear. In fact, in Mark 10, when they are just pushing back the kids and saying, get out of here, we're doing adult stuff, Jesus, it says, grew indignant. That's an opinion. Because children are not to be mistreated. It says that those who live in the flesh, in Romans 8, it says, those who live in the flesh cannot please God. He has an opinion about that. He has an opinion about disobedience. So yes, there are times he is displeased. There are other times, and that's what we're really trying to find here in the 11th chapter, where he's pleased. He's pleased with true praise. You read that over and over again in the Psalms. He's very much pleased with wisdom. Remember Solomon's wise prayer request that he made. And I always think of this when I think, what pleases God? I think of that passage in 1 Corinthians that says, he was pleased to save man with the foolishness of God. See, God can't be foolish. Everything God does is wise and right. So you can put quote marks around that little phrase, the foolishness of God, where Paul was saying, I'm calling it that, he said, because people of the world often look at the cross and say, how foolish. Are you kidding me? That's the way to God? And Paul says, God was pleased with that so-called foolishness, as Dennis shared so well today. Thank you, Dennis. Such a good job to share with us how pleased God was with his son's sacrifice and the ransom that came from that. Of course, if we're talking about the pleasure of God and where God is pleased, you got to mention Jesus, right? I mean, what did he actually say through the heavens when John the Baptist baptized Jesus? This is my son, the voice said, in whom I am well pleased. So we have a God who is invisible and creative and resolute. He has opinions. Oh, and of course this. We have a God who's faithful. Look at this 11th verse. And by faith, even Sarah, remember her? Who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children, because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. Sure, she had a little trouble at the beginning. Remember, she laughed. Yeah, right. And God, who was there in an interesting form at that time, sitting at the table with him, at least through the angel, said, you laughed. Oh, I didn't laugh. Yeah, you laughed. In fact, we're going to have you name that boy Laughter. That's what Isaac means, laughter. But her laughter became laughter of faith and joy, because she finally learned God was faithful. And he is faithful even so often when we are not. And even when we are faithful, sometimes we say, whew, that was close, Lord. I mean, I know you came through, but it just kind of seemed like you were late. And then we learn, no, God's never late. He's always right on time. Can't you just see the children of the Red Sea with old Pharaoh behind them and his chariots coming after him? He was breathing down their necks. Whoa, God, you cut that a little close. Not really. Just wanted to wait till all of Pharaoh's army got within the walls of the water, and then I drowned them. Took care of it for you. God is so faithful. I think you could ask Samson, and he'd say, well, it took me a while to learn. And in fact, I was in the last act of my life when he came through. And I killed the greatest number of Philistines, the enemy of Israel, in my death. Just ask old Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, hey, did you really wonder for a little bit there if God was going to be faithful as you were getting pushed closer and closer to those flames? Ask Abraham. He gives me a promise that I'm going to have a family, and finally, almost 25 years later, nearing 100, I finally have the beginnings of a family. You could ask Lazarus. Well, he was kind of late, wasn't he, Lazarus? I mean, after all, you did die. Well, yeah, but I've got quite a story to tell now. And he did it in his time, and as far as I'm concerned, he was on time. And of course, the resurrection itself of Jesus. Here they are mourning in sorrow. God comes through. He is faithful. He's also generous, very generous. We didn't finish that 6th verse. Without faith, it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists. We looked at that. How about this? And that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Our God is a rewarder. He is generous. He's generous with his time. He will stay all day long with you if you so desire. He's generous with his riches and resources because he owns it all. He's certainly generous with his love. His love has no limits. It makes it so much easier to ask with faith when you know that the person you're asking is generous. These amazing qualities of our God, and that's just a few of them. People of faith are pleasers of God. They believe not only that he exists, but they believe he's invisible, creative, resolute, faithful, generous. That is our God. And if we can have the faith that's described here, we will please him. The Department of Transportation set aside millions of dollars as early as the 90s for research and testing of the automated highway system. They said it will relieve traffic woes. There will be a super cruise control. It's going to even work, or especially work, in heavily congested cities. There will be magnets embedded in the asphalt every 4 miles. Signals will be transferred between vehicle and a main computer system, and it will result in steering, acceleration, and braking without you doing a thing. It'll be automated. There will even be cameras along the side of the road, double checking. Once you take the exit off of that special highway, then control will be given back to the driver. And researchers and government officials claimed for years, we have the technological capability to address any specific problem. We just have one big challenge yet to address. Trust. The only thing we can't do yet, they said, is get people to trust the system. They said it's not a technology issue. But let me ask you, would you drive closely spaced at high speeds with your hands completely off your steering wheel, with your foot away from the brake and the accelerator, if you were going through St. Louis? Hey, would you even do it up in Springfield? Trust. Trust. They say it's not going to happen until there's trust. And that, I don't know what my opinion exactly is about that, but I know what my opinion is about a God who says that. About a God who says, I've got this. I want you in relationship with me to get your hands off the steering wheel, and especially off the brake, and trust me. Now, it's possible that you don't even have a relationship with God. You're wondering, what am I doing in this place today? But maybe you're here because God got you here somehow, one way or another. And it could be that what needs to take place first for you, you need to start a relationship with God. And do you remember what Jesus said? No one gets to him, no one starts a relationship with him without first what? Coming through me, coming through Jesus, coming through the Son. So whatever it is today, do you need to begin a faith relationship with God? And I encourage you to make that decision. And then let us know about it. We even say, if you want to walk down an aisle, just say, hey, I give up. I'm ready to find out about having a true faith relationship with God. That's more than okay here at New Testament Christian Church. But all of us, all right? Where's our faith? Where's our faith? Is it really strong in the person of God? Let's stand together and let's sing a song about faith.